Chapter 1. The Roar That Broke the Silence. The Alaskan wilderness stretched endlessly in every direction, an unforgiving land of ice and pine. Isaac Carter stood alone in that silent expanse, breathing in the sharp metallic air. Above him, the sky was a washed-out gray, low clouds pressing down as if the heavens themselves weighed heavy upon the earth. Snow dusted the ground, crunching beneath his boots with every step, each sound swallowed by the towering spruce trees that surrounded him like ancient sentinels. Isaac was in his element. The wilderness was his refuge, his church. As a child, he learned to hunt alongside his father in these very woods, their family line bound to the rhythm of the land. Now, in his late 30s, weathered and sharp-eyed, Isaac returned each winter to remind himself of life's raw simplicity. Out here, it was just man against nature. No phones, no noise, no distractions, just survival. For 3 days, his hunt had been fruitful. Tracks of caribou lined the riverbanks, and he'd already bagged 2 hares for stew. The early morning of the 4th day greeted him with a restless wind, whispering through the evergreens. Isaac sipped the last of his hot coffee from a tin mug, strapped on his rifle, and ventured deeper into the forest, following a fresh trail. Moose tracks. His heart quickened. A moose would feed him for days, enough meat to salt and dry for the long trek back. He moved with practiced ease, stepping around low branches, his breath curling in white puffs before him. His gloved fingers flexed around the stock of his Remington rifle, senses alert, eyes scanning every movement. That's when it happened. A sound, low, guttural, primal, ripped through the quiet. Not the distant call of a raven or the rustle of a snow hare. This was something far larger, far closer. Isaac froze, instincts flaring like a struck match. From the thicket ahead, a monstrous figure emerged, pushing through the brush with a snarl that shook Isaac to his bones. A grizzly, massive, its fur thick with winter layers, patches of mud and ice clinging to its flanks. Its shoulders rippled with muscle, jaws wide open, teeth yellow and ragged. Isaac's first thought was disbelief. Bears should have been deep in hibernation. This one was awake, and worse, it was injured. Its left flank smeared with a dark wound, perhaps from an earlier fight or a failed hunt. Hunger blazed in its amber eyes. Instinct screamed, "Shoot! Now!" Isaac's rifle snapped up, his hunter's reflexes taking over. The first shot cracked through the cold air, striking the bear's shoulder with a sickening thud. The beast stumbled, but didn't fall. It reared up, towering nearly 10 feet tall, letting loose a roar that rattled Isaac's chest. His second shot followed, a hurried squeeze of the trigger, but the bullet only grazed its rib cage. The bear barreled forward, faster than anything so large should move, snow spraying beneath its pounding paws. Isaac barely had time to sidestep, diving behind a thick pine. The bear collided with the trunk, sending a violent shudder through the earth. Isaac stumbled backward, raising the rifle again, but the beast was already upon him. Massive claws slashed through the air, catching Isaac's side with brutal force. The world turned into pain. His vision exploded with white-hot light as he was thrown like a rag doll, crashing through brittle underbrush. His rifle slipped from his grasp, skittering uselessly into the snow. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Isaac lay sprawled, breath heaving, blood seeping through his coat. Every muscle screamed. He looked up, expecting death, but the bear stood there, panting heavily, blood dripping from its own wounds. Then, inexplicably, the bear backed away, limping, its rage spent, or maybe its injuries too severe to continue. With a final huff, it turned and disappeared into the woods, leaving Isaac broken and bleeding in its wake. Isaac tried to sit up and collapsed with a grunt. The world tilted wildly, the cold seeping into his bones. He pressed a gloved hand to his side, feeling warm blood pulse through torn fabric. His leg throbbed unnaturally, bent at an awkward angle. His rifle was gone. His pack, food, and supplies were back at the distant camp. Panic threatened to rise in his chest, but Isaac forced it down. He gritted his teeth, feeling the bite of cold air in his lungs. Survival came down to one simple rule: keep moving or die. Gritting through the searing pain, Isaac reached down, pulled his hunting knife from its sheath, and cut away the ruined section of his coat. His fingers trembled as he pressed fabric into the wounds, tying them as tightly as he could manage. The process was crude and agonizing, but it slowed the bleeding. Above, the wind picked up, clouds thickening. Snow began to drift lazily down, the first warning of a storm. Isaac's heart pounded in his chest, not from fear of the bear, but from the raw realization. No one knew where he was. No backup, no search party. He was utterly alone in the frozen wild. But Isaac Carter didn't intend to die. With a groan of effort, he pushed himself upright, leaning against the trunk for support. Somewhere beyond the trees, a river flowed. Fresh water, maybe fish beneath the ice. If he could get there, he could make shelter, maybe find a way to survive. He took his first step. Agony screamed through his leg, but he kept moving. In the savage silence of the Alaskan wild, only one thing mattered now: survive or be swallowed by the cold. And Isaac Carter was not ready to be swallowed. Chapter 2: Wounds and Willpower. Isaac Carter felt every second of life drain from his body as he stumbled through the snow-covered forest. His breathing came in ragged, uneven bursts. Each step was a battlefield. His right leg dragged behind him uselessly, twisted from the bear's savage strike, sending spikes of raw, nerve-searing pain through his entire body. His ribs throbbed from the impact, and the gashes along his side oozed blood, already starting to freeze against his skin. The world tilted. The trees spun in circles above his head, and the earth beneath his feet wobbled as though he stood on the deck of a storm-tossed ship. But deep within, Isaac's survival instinct screamed louder than the pain. Get up, move, don't stop. He forced himself forward, half stumbling, half crawling toward what he guessed was west, the direction of the river. Water meant life. If he could reach it, he could follow its course back toward his distant camp, or at least find something to eat, maybe catch a fish. Most importantly, it would help him orient himself in this vast, frozen labyrinth. His teeth clenched so hard they ached, lips cracking in the dry, bitter wind. Snowflakes drifted from the leaden sky, swirling around him like quiet, beautiful omens of death. The temperature was falling rapidly, and Isaac knew what that meant. The first signs of a brutal Alaskan cold snap, the kind that could freeze a man solid overnight. Every few steps he collapsed against a tree, drawing in shallow breaths, trying to steady the nauseating whirl of the world around him. The blood loss was serious. He could feel his body cooling unnaturally fast, shivering despite his layers. His thermal undershirt was already shredded where the bear's claws had struck. The heavy-duty winter jacket that had protected him for 3 winters was now soaked in blood, hanging open and useless. Using the hacked sapling as a crude crutch, Isaac pushed himself up. Teeth gritted hard enough he felt his jaw might snap. His right leg dangled painfully, but with the support of the crutch, he could limp, at least partially distribute his weight. Each movement was torture, but Isaac refused to let his mind dwell on the agony. Instead, he remembered his daughter Sarah's smile, her soft laughter when she hugged him before this trip. He remembered his wife Anna's quiet strength, the way she always teased him for going out into the wild every year, but kissed him fiercely at the doorstep anyway. He couldn't die here, not like this, not torn apart and forgotten in the belly of some nameless forest. Isaac pressed on, dragging himself along the trees, following the subtle downward slope that would eventually lead him to the river. The light was already beginning to fade, the day slipping away. Alaskan winters didn't grant long hours of sun, and when the dark came, the cold deepened with a vengeance. He would need shelter, even a crude one, before the night swallowed him whole. He searched the nearby landscape through bleary eyes. About 50 yards ahead, he spotted a narrow hollow beneath a fallen spruce, its thick trunk creating a small overhang, sheltered on one side by a large boulder. A natural windbreak. Perfect. Isaac dragged his half-frozen body forward, every inch feeling like a lifetime, until he finally collapsed beneath the fallen tree. The snow cushioned him, and the boulder shielded his back from the wind. It wasn't much, but it was better than open sky. His fingers, now nearly numb, worked frantically. He gathered broken branches and pine needles around him, forming a crude bedding to separate himself from the ground. Then, with more effort than he thought possible, he carved a shallow trench nearby and covered himself with snow, an old survival trick to insulate heat when no fire was possible. No matches, no lighter, no way to start a fire without his pack. Survive the night. That's the only mission now. Isaac curled into himself, knees tucked as close as his shattered body allowed. He breathed slow, steadying himself, ignoring the throbbing wounds, the hunger pangs, the biting cold. Every minute of consciousness was a victory, every heartbeat a rebellion against death. And as the first stars blinked in the frozen sky, Isaac Carter promised himself, "I will see the sun rise again." First priority, stop the bleeding. Isaac leaned his back against a fallen log, wincing as his broken ribs pressed sharply inward. With fumbling fingers, he pulled out his hunting knife from the sheath on his hip. The blade was stained with sap and dirt, but it was sharp. He gritted his teeth and slashed long, thick strips from his remaining inner shirt, hissing at the cold biting into his bare skin. The makeshift bandages weren't pretty, but he worked with what he had. He pressed one thick strip against the worst of the gashes on his side, cinching it tight with a knot that sent fresh jolts of pain through his torso. His hands shook violently, his breath coming in short gasps as black spots danced at the edges of his vision. Stay awake. Focus. After securing the wounds as best as possible, he turned his attention to his broken leg. Just looking at it made bile rise in his throat. It bent inward at a sick angle just above the ankle, the thick woolen pants shredded, darkening with dried and fresh blood. The bone was likely fractured, but the skin wasn't broken. Small mercy. Isaac scanned the surroundings, his gaze locking onto a few small saplings nearby. He crawled toward them on his elbows and knees, grabbing the sturdiest, straightest branch he could find. Using the knife, he hacked it down, trimming off the smaller twigs with quick, messy strokes. A splint. Crude, but enough to keep moving. He straightened his leg as best as he could, biting down on his glove to keep from screaming, and secured the branch along his leg using the remaining fabric strips. Tears blurred his vision, not from fear, but from the all-consuming pain of setting and tying the broken limb. By the time he finished, his fingers were nearly frozen stiff, the thin gloves soaked through with snow and blood. His muscles quivered uncontrollably, a combination of pain, cold, and the slow creep of exhaustion. He forced himself to sit upright against the log, staring out at the snow-laden woods. His rifle was gone, knocked away during the attack, probably buried somewhere beneath the fresh snow. His pack, with food, emergency rations, a flare gun, and thermal blankets, was still back at the campsite, at least 12, maybe 15 miles from where he stood now. Isaac's entire world had been reduced to a knife, shredded clothes, and sheer willpower. But he wasn't dead. Not yet. He allowed himself no more than 10 minutes of rest, knowing that stillness was a silent killer in these temperatures. The body cooled fast when the blood wasn't moving, and hypothermia would be quick to claim him if he lay there too long. Chapter 3. Day 1 to Day 5. Learning to Survive. Day 1. Awakening to Survival. When Isaac woke, The world was no less brutal than when he had passed out. A dull gray light filtered through the canopy above, but it wasn't warmth. It was just another reminder of how close the Arctic Circle loomed above him. His body was stiff, his breath shallow. The gashes on his side had frozen slightly, blood crusted and blackened, but the throbbing told him infection was already festering. Every muscle screamed for rest, but Isaac knew he couldn't afford it. "You sleep too long, you don't wake up," he reminded himself grimly. His first order of business was shelter, something more substantial than a snowbank. Crawling out from under the fallen spruce, he scouted his immediate surroundings. About 30 feet from his shelter, the ground dipped toward a small, slow-moving stream, hidden beneath thin ice. His fractured leg dragged behind him, splinted poorly, but good enough to keep him moving. The hunger gnawed at his gut, sharp and persistent. The cold was a constant enemy, nipping at his exposed skin through the shredded thermal layers. Isaac gathered what the forest offered: dried pine branches, clumps of snow-covered moss, and brittle sticks scattered beneath the trees. He worked all morning, breathing heavily, to construct a rough lean-to against the boulder. Snow was packed tightly against the outer walls for insulation. Inside, he spread pine needles and branches to keep himself off the frozen ground. No food, no fire, no way to signal for help. Only the sound of the wind and the occasional distant bird kept him company. His knife was now his lifeline. That night, lying curled in his crude shelter, Isaac realized the fight had just begun. Day 2. The first hunger. The second day came with piercing cold that burrowed into his bones. Isaac's stomach cramped violently. Hunger sharpened his senses, but sapped his strength. The river was close enough to reach, and with great effort, Isaac dragged himself to its edge. He used his knife to chip through the thin layer of ice, scooping handfuls of freezing water into his mouth. It tasted of iron and earth, but it kept his body from shutting down. Water buys time, he thought, but time meant nothing without food. By midday, desperation led him to a clutch of bare-branched bushes, still holding a few withered berries. He recognized them, snowberries, not ideal, but edible in small quantities. He popped them into his mouth, their tart bitterness stinging his tongue. Hunger didn't ease, but his mind calmed slightly, knowing he had put something into his system. He spent the afternoon sharpening sticks into crude spikes, fashioning small traps. His father had taught him primitive trapping techniques, figure-4 deadfalls and spring snares. Even with a broken leg and failing body, muscle memory took over. By sundown, he had set 2 traps near the stream and hobbled back to his shelter. Isaac fell asleep with visions of meat roasting over a fire he didn't have. Day 3. Blood on the snow. Isaac's third morning in the wilderness started with an unusual sight. Fresh animal tracks near his shelter. Small, likely hare or rabbit. Hope flickered inside him. Dragging himself to his snares, Isaac discovered one had been triggered. His pulse quickened as he approached. And there it was, a half-grown snowshoe hare, caught by the neck, its body stiff and cold. He muttered a hoarse, thankful whisper to the forest. He hadn't eaten meat in 3 days. He didn't have the luxury of fire to cook it, so raw it had to be. He used his knife to skin the creature, hands trembling. He had learned the hard way on previous trips how parasites could thrive in raw meat, but survival trumped caution. He ate slowly, chewing each bite thoroughly, feeling energy, however meager, return to his limbs. The remainder of the hare he smoked over a weak flame. He managed to spark some embers using dry wood and friction, something he'd only practiced for emergencies. It wasn't much of a fire, barely enough to ward off frostbite for a few hours, but it was something. That night, for the first time since the attack, Isaac slept without gnawing hunger eating him alive. Day 4. Signs in the wind. Snow fell steadily through the morning, a soft, persistent drizzle that blanketed his shelter. Isaac awoke to find his world muted under several fresh inches. His leg was no better, hot to the touch, the swelling worsening, but he could bend his knee slightly without crying out, which he took as progress. After forcing down the last scraps of dried rabbit, he set off to check the traps again. No luck. Both were empty, tripped by wind or passing animals. With nothing to eat, his eyes turned to the trees above, seeking out birds or squirrels. His knife wouldn't do much good against the wary treetop creatures, but Isaac improvised. He carved a crude spear, attaching a sharpened stone to the tip using strips from his ruined coat. It wasn't elegant, but it was better than nothing. By mid-afternoon, he managed to start a second fire, a small victory, boiling snow water in a hollowed section of wood to purify it. He rationed every mouthful, every calorie of energy spent. That evening, as the wind shifted, Isaac's instincts prickled. He listened carefully. Somewhere in the distance, faint howls drifted through the woods. Wolves. His shelter was camouflaged by snow, his scent masked by ice and pine, but his heart beat faster. He whispered a silent vow, "I won't die tonight." Day 5. Learning the rules of the wild. By day 5, Isaac's body had adjusted to the rhythm of survival. Pain was constant but dulled. His hunger sharpened his senses. His mind, once fogged with exhaustion, was now calculating, focused. He managed to trap another rabbit near the stream, this time carefully cooking it over a better-built fire. He spent the morning reinforcing his shelter with extra branches, using his knife to carve grooves that interlocked the wood like primitive logwork. He made another discovery near the river, tracks from a beaver. That meant a lodge wasn't far downstream, and if he could get close, he might be able to snare a larger source of meat. He fashioned a longer spear, tied securely with torn clothes, and practiced throwing it as best as his fractured body allowed. Isaac learned to read the land, to listen for distant movement, to smell the snow-laden wind for signs of life or death. His hands grew more calloused, his face more gaunt, but his eyes burned with determination. Every breath he took was an act of defiance against the merciless Alaskan winter. Every hour survived was another triumph. 5 days after a grizzly left him for dead, Isaac Carter wasn't just surviving anymore. He was learning how to live again in the wild. Chapter 4. Day 6 to 10. Fighting against the elements. Day 6. The sky breaks open. When Isaac woke on the 6th day, the sky above him was a swirling, angry canvas of gray. The air felt heavier, damper. The usual brittle cold was replaced by a chilling wetness that soaked through bone and cloth alike. His instincts stirred uneasily. Something was coming. And then he heard it, a low, distant roar, not from an animal but from the wind itself, screaming across the treetops, howling through the canyons of snow-packed mountains beyond his line of sight. A storm. Isaac's mouth went dry. The kind of storm that swallowed men whole, that buried shelters, that froze breath inside lungs. He had seen storms like this on previous trips, always from the safety of a warm tent or cabin. Now, he was a battered shadow of himself, with a broken leg, no proper gear, and only a crude lean-to to stand between him and nature's wrath. He moved as quickly as his splinted leg allowed, reinforcing the shelter. He stacked more branches along the sides, packing every available crevice with snow to block drafts. His fingertips went numb as he worked relentlessly, ignoring the stabbing pain in his ribs and the fever pulsing through his body. By midday, the first flakes fell, thick and wet, splattering against his crude roof. The wind picked up, rattling the branches above, groaning like an ancient beast. Isaac curled inside his den of pine and snow, clutching his knife close, whispering to himself, "Hold. Just hold. The storm raged on. Day 7. The White Tomb. The world outside ceased to exist. Snow pounded relentlessly, waves of white burying everything in sight. The howling wind rattled the walls of his shelter like invisible fists, trying to rip it apart. Isaac stayed curled in a fetal position, wrapped in layers of scavenged cloth, pine needles and animal hide. Food was gone. Hunger came back, savage and consuming, twisting his gut into painful knots. But it wasn't hunger that frightened Isaac. It was the stillness, the fear that the storm would bury his only shelter, that he would suffocate under its crushing weight. Every hour, he forced himself to move, pushing up against the ceiling, knocking loose snow from above to prevent the deadly buildup. His leg felt worse. The flesh burned where it should have been cold, a sure sign of infection. His ribs were tight, and every cough rattled inside his chest like broken glass. He sipped melted snow, just enough to keep his lips from cracking open, and ate 2 remaining frozen berries he had saved. A pitiful meal, but it quieted his mind. When night came, the wind grew fiercer, wailing through the forest like wolves from another world. Isaac whispered promises to himself. Day 8. Silence and shadows. When the storm finally broke on the 8th morning, Isaac could hardly believe it. A strange quiet settled over the forest, muffled by several feet of fresh snow. The world was transformed, vast, white, and endless. His shelter had survived, but barely. He had to crawl his way out, shoving snow aside with weak, trembling arms. His muscles ached with exhaustion, but his spirit lifted slightly as the pale winter sun blinked through the thinning clouds. But then reality hit him. Days of being snowed in had cost him precious time and energy. His traps were buried. No fresh meat. His leg was visibly worse, hot and swollen, purple bruising spreading up his thigh. He needed food, badly. Isaac crawled back to the stream, now nearly invisible beneath a thick blanket of ice and snow. He hacked through it with the knife, feeling his body scream in protest. He scooped water into his mouth, icy but clean. With no bait, he fashioned a crude fishing spear, knowing it was a desperate gamble. For an hour, he stood motionless beside the stream, the spear clutched in his freezing hand, waiting for any sign of fish. His vision blurred, his strength waned. Then, movement. With a clumsy lunge, he drove the spear downward and miraculously pinned a small fish beneath the point. Tears pricked his eyes. He cleaned the fish and ate it raw, his body too weak to risk starting a fire in the shifting snow. The meager meal felt like a feast. That night, Isaac huddled back inside his shelter, belly less empty, hope a fraction brighter. Day 9. Death lurks nearby. On the 9th day, Isaac's body revolted. Fever gripped him with icy fingers, alternating between burning heat and shivering cold. His thoughts fractured, dreams bleeding into reality. He forced himself to drink more water and to stretch his battered limbs just enough to prevent complete atrophy. Hunger returned with vengeance, gnawing, unforgiving. But a greater danger crept closer. While checking one of his traps, Isaac found fresh tracks in the snow. Wolf tracks. Several of them, circling. His weakened senses told him the truth. They were watching him, following his scent. "Not yet," he muttered, tightening his grip on the spear. "Not like this." Isaac reinforced his shelter's entrance, stacking rocks and fallen logs, creating a crude barrier. He sharpened his spear's tip to a wicked point, setting it by his side. The wolves were out there, waiting for him to fall asleep, waiting for his strength to fade. But Isaac still had fight in him. He would not be prey. Day 10. A fire, a fight, a flicker of life. Day 10 dawned with windless silence. Isaac's bones ached, his muscles barely obeyed, but a grim determination steeled his resolve. "If you don't move today, you die," he told himself. He scavenged the area, finding more tracks but no fresh kills. No animals stirred in the aftermath of the storm. He managed to snag another small hare from a rebuilt trap, life clinging to life. That afternoon, with painstaking effort, he gathered dry bark from the underside of fallen logs, used the friction method with a split branch and bowstring from his old bootlaces, and coaxed a fire into existence. Smoke curled upward, and for the first time in days, Isaac felt real warmth on his skin. He cooked the hare slowly, savoring every bite, letting the meat replenish his failing body. As darkness fell, the fire burned like a beacon of defiance. In the distance, the wolves howled again, closer this time, but Isaac smiled grimly. "Come if you want," he whispered, his grip tightening around the spear, fire crackling beside him. "I'll be waiting." By the end of day 10, Isaac Carter was no longer a broken man crawling through snow. He was a survivor, fighting tooth and nail against a merciless land, mastering the rhythm of life and death in the frozen wilderness. He wasn't just alive, he was living, fighting, enduring, and most importantly, refusing to die. Epilogue: The Man Who Refused to Die. Months passed before Isaac Carter stood on his own feet again, battered but alive. His return from the wild became something of a legend back home. Newspapers ran stories with headlines like "Hunter Cheats Death After Bear Mauling" and "14 Days of Survival in Alaska's Frozen Hell." Friends, neighbors, and strangers marveled at his tale, calling him a hero, a miracle, a man carved out of iron. But Isaac never thought of himself that way. When he looked in the mirror, he didn't see a hero. He saw a man who had been pushed to the very edge of life, who had been broken in body, but had refused to let his spirit shatter. He saw a man who had discovered the raw, unfiltered truth of survival. Not the glamorized version told in books, but the grueling, painful, primal experience that reduced life to its most basic elements: breath, warmth, and willpower. The scars along his ribs itched whenever it rained. His leg, though healed, never regained its full strength, forcing him to walk with a stiff, lurching limp. The frostbite cost him 2 toes, and winter's chill would always bite deeper into his bones. But none of that mattered. Isaac wore his scars like badges, reminders of the battle he had fought, not just against the bear, the storm, or the wolves, but against himself, against despair, against death itself. Back in his home, surrounded by the comforting chaos of family, Isaac found a renewed sense of life. He cherished the smallest moments, the weight of his daughter Sarah sleeping on his chest, the smell of Anna's cooking, the laughter around the dinner table. He no longer took sunrise for granted, no longer complained about minor inconveniences, and no longer wasted time on trivial worries. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of the morning, Isaac would step outside his back porch, feel the crisp air on his skin, and stare toward the distant mountains. He didn't feel fear. He felt gratitude. The wilderness hadn't tried to kill him. It had awakened him. People called him a survivor, but in Isaac's heart, he knew it was more than that. He was a fighter, a man who had stared down death, spit in its face, and crawled back with nothing but his teeth, his knife, and a burning refusal to quit. The world, with all its comforts and safety nets, would never fully understand what he had endured. But Isaac didn't need them to understand, because every breath he took, every step he limped, was a silent victory over the wilderness that had almost claimed him. In the end, Isaac Carter was more than a survivor. He was the man who refused to die.